I want to start with the Justice Department first. I'll then double back to Charlie Kirk and things that happened over the weekend. But I do want to start with what's happening with looking the other way on the apparent Homan undercover video of him taking a $50,000 bribe, dropping that investigation at the same time that the President of the United States is firing attorneys who won't go from the Justice Department who won't go after his enemies because there's not sufficient evidence to actually charge them with anything. Give me your take on this sort of snapshot of America right now.
Well, one is just the simple reality that in our day, Mark, it's nearly impossible to believe that if this video exists, it is going to be widely spread, right? I mean, it's not like the old days of the Nixonian tapes when you just all of a sudden had a big chunk of the Nixon, Oval Office tapes just disappear, right? Remember those days? And people are like, wait, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Well, things go out on the electronic, as you know, universe so quickly these days. If this is out there, it can be proven that it's credible and not AI. There's going to be a lot of people, and including people, particularly some, I would probably guess, some Republican senators, U.S. senators, going to say, wait a minute, no, this is not good. So that's one thing. I just think that it's harder to hide under the rocks these days. Does that make sense? It's nearly impossible in many ways. So there's that. As far as going after people, this is sadly, as you know, has become a chess game. Some people call it a tit for tat. It's just, Mark, it seems like it sadly has become baked in the last 10 years. When your side, quote unquote, takes control, particularly of one of the chambers of Congress or the White House, now it's time to launch a new round of just fill in the blank, impeachment, investigations, whatever it is. By the way, there's a long history of this. You go clear back into those people saying, clear back into JFK and when RFK was Attorney General, their FBI director, they had big question marks about it. Suppose he was even investigating RFK and JFK themselves.
Well, I was going to thank you for saying that. Their FBI investigator was investigating them.
Mentioned Martin Luther King. I mean, it just goes. So sadly, there is some long history of some of this, but let's just keep it for now. The Trump and his people feel like they were done dirty. Okay, they said this on the campaign trail for eons. And so now it's our chance to go after people that went after us. That's what this is all about. I don't think, and certainly, let me be absolutely unequivocally clear, anybody credible in the political arena will say, look, equal justice, both sides. If Holman's got dirty hands, that deserves to come out, and he deserves to be prosecuted. We'll see where this all ends up. I mean, the reality is this. Let's just say, for example, that Trump's able to do away with these prosecutors and, manipulates the Justice Department or whatever. Hey, whenever the next round comes, whether it be 28 or whatever, it might be as early as 14 months from now in 26, Mark. Let's say the Democrats take control of the House. Now you've got a whole new series of subpoenas, investigations, right? Letters requesting the Justice Department to do this or that. So this isn't going away. And this particular round of it, as I just mentioned, could end in as early as 14 months in November of 26.
This is interesting to me because I'm going to push back on you, or at least question you a little bit about this, because you mentioned the Homan thing, like if there's something there, then there should be the prosecution. But I've just, as related the story, which is that the Justice Department is dropping this, even though there is this video and this Homan investigation had continued for some time. Are you implying there isn't really the video? And
no. Let me be clear.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, if it can be demonstrated that that is authentic video and Homan took a bag of 50,000 ones or however the denominations were in there, this guy deserves to be prosecuted. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Okay.
No, we all agree on that. But the point is the Justice Department has dropped the investigation. That's the point. I mean, it's not.
Well, that's why.
If it can be proven, it's not going to be proven. I mean, it's going to be. The point is the Justice Department has dropped it. The reason I'm mentioning that is I think this is happening across the board. In other words, it's that old dictator's adage, right? To my friends, anything they want. To my enemies, the law. So to my friends, Homan, a guy in my administration, I'm letting go. I'm letting go.
Well, that's why, Mark. That's why I try to encourage you, my friend, that whole Humpty Dumpty could be turned upside down and on his head in as little as 14 months. Because if the Democrats, for example, and they have a very good shot at doing so, I told you recently, I think it's probably 50-50 at this point, of retaking control of the House, they can subpoena that video.
I see. Okay.
They
Okay.
can hold their own. And remember, I think this sometimes is confusing for people, but this is important. Okay. Congress can launch its own investigations with its own subpoena power. Okay. And the Justice Department, of course, can launch its own investigation. My point is simply to say they could say in 14 months, they take control of the House, they have the speakership, they have the chairmanship of all the committees, including judiciary, and they say, look, we're subpoenaing that video. Give it over. I'm assuming, honest to God, Mark, that was sort of my first point. They probably, Democrats Party, have that video. All right.
And they would sure the video exists, obviously.
Yeah, and so they simply would launch their own investigations, subpoena all the people close to it, including the FBI agents who gave over that bag of money to Homan. They would subpoena Homan himself. You see where this is going? I mean, I see
where it's going, but what should be frustrating to all Americans is that it has to go that way. So if the Democrats can come in 14 months, then you can actually hold someone who openly took $50,000 in cash from an FBI agent, undercover FBI agent who was posing as a businessman. Then you could begin to subpoena that. It's not even a prosecution. It's just subpoenaing it. And I guess there's a reputational damage, et cetera. Gary, he's openly corrupt if the stuff's there. It's not, again, we drag this out, so there has to be a congressional investigation. He gets subpoenaed. Why isn't he being prosecuted? Because he's a friend of the president and he serves in his administration. Look, who was the gold bar guy there? Menendez?
Robert Menendez.
He's a Democrat under the Biden. They didn't drop an investigation on him. They locked him up. They sent him to prison, him and his wife. I find I don't think it's Democrats and Republicans weighing in the same way. This ain't your daddy's GOP.
Okay, Mark, I'm giving you a pragmatic way forward for how it could happen.
Okay.
But you may need to say that screed a third time since I'm sitting here at this microphone. Just to get it out of your system. Okay, so here's the thing. What I said from the beginning, Homan should definitely be prosecuted if the facts are true. Period. End of story. Okay. There's no question about that, okay? Let's all agree on that. I simply was giving you a pragmatic way forward for it still to happen. Okay. And by the way, when they subpoena, it's not just reputational, okay? If Homan were to get subpoenaed and not come before that committee, and because they would clearly play that tape for him to see in that hearing and say, is that you or is that not you, right? I mean, that's what would happen. And it would be an immediate reference to a passing on to the Justice Department. Look, this warrants formal federal charges. All I was saying was that's the way forward. If indeed Homan is guilty, the Justice Department stonewalls and Trump orders them not to pursue charges. That's all I was trying to give you, is a sort of silver lining, Mark, for you this morning.
Well, you were basically saying this is the remedy for this circumstance. I get it.
Right, okay. Right. But I in no way was justifying Homan not being prosecuted, not being indicted, not being investigated, in no way, shape, or form, Mark. You know I am an equal opportunity hold to account person, period. End of story. And by the way, one little aside on Menendez, just so people know, it's not like he was a big friend of the Biden White House. I mean, by the time Menendez got charged, everybody in his party, I mean the Democratic contingent in the U.S. Senate and the Biden White House, wanted him gone.
Well, and of that, there could be no dispute. So let me just then take you to this other, just one half a click over on the Justice Department weaponizing in a way that sort of makes any, I'd suggest, consideration of weaponizing that went under Biden kind of looked like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I mean, this is a kind of demand from the president. It's an overt demand to go after all of these different perceived enemies and find something on them. Now, isn't that authoritarian playbook stuff, or can you give me some kind of correction on that as well? And I'll grant you, and I'm sorry, and then I will let you speak. I don't mean to ask a question and then continue on, but I
Okay.
do want to say that I'll grant you that there can be, and there was even under the Biden administration, what I'd consider sort of a selective prosecution on some level. I don't in any way feel as though that the last administration was, squeaky clean in this area, but this is to me a standard deviation worse. This is truly the world of authoritarianism when you're saying, I don't like these people, these Democrats, these major donors to the Democratic Party, these major party luminaries. They are my enemies, and I want you to go after them and do it now.
Right. Well, there's no doubt, Mark, that any pressure from any White House on any Justice Department is absolutely and unequivocally inappropriate. I mean, it has no place in our democratic process. It has no place in our structure of American governance, and it undermines the very institutions that underpin a free society, most notably our judiciary, as well as our executive branch. And to the degree that it happens and pressure is put on Congress, that branch as well. So there's no question about that. And I want to be, again, unequivocally clear about that. I don't care who the president is. I don't care who their enemies are. Richard Nixon had his own enemies list, very famously. That's where that term first came to be. There's also a sense, as you know, and here's my bottom line on this, Mark. I am concerned more broadly about people's declining confidence in our institutions. You could go back to Biden's pardoning of thousands of people at the end of his term, right? People said, wait a minute, this is historic. Nobody's ever pardoned this many people at the end. What is going on here? That's sort of the bigger, broader picture I want to paint.
Remind us of what you're talking about, the pardoning of thousands of people.
Well, at the very end of the Biden administration, people cited the fact that there were large numbers of pardons that went beyond presidential norms. Let's just put it that way. And people had real question marks about that and why that was happening. And
you mean the preemptive pardons? Is that what are you talking about? I don't know
some of them were preemptive, of course, for his family members, etc. And there were just a whole host of other pardons for lower offenses, drug offenses, and things like that people had concerns about because of just the numerical size of that pardon.
Okay.
But there were, of course, question marks. People come down on both sides of this. The preemptive pardons for Biden family members. I'm not, Mark, you know me, I'm not an apologist for either side. I'm simply describing my concern and a number of people's concerns in the larger political arena of the undermining of our people's confidence in their institutions of governance.
I think their confidence should be undermined. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing what's happening. I mean, I think you're seeing a wrecking ball taken to justice and freedoms in America. And you mentioned Biden, so I'll just address it for a moment. I know Biden issued a bunch of commutations to drug offenders. That was a lot of it. And even so, there were, this is marijuana, cocaine, I believe, as well. You'd have to look. And then, this stuff chapter and verse better than I do. I thought he was way, I was not a Hunter Biden fan. I even felt it was his brother that was involved in some crap, man. I didn't have any tolerance for any of that stuff. But these guys, I mean, you've got the Biden family, again, engaged in their own improprieties, in my judgment. But these guys, the Trumps are, it's insane. I mean, it's wide open. But to put a specific on the insanity, just because you said thousands, I thought the pardoning of the J6ers, that was, to me, I mean, that told you all you needed to know about what was going to happen on some level, and now it's happened. And here's why I say that, just very quickly, because there were really violent criminals there. I mean, you had Proud Boys, they had prosecutions that are really very difficult ones, and they got convictions in those prosecutions that are really hard to get. And so the pardoning of these people, I mean, again, people who beat police officers within an inch of their lives on January 6th, the pardoning of them, along with those who might have been lower level participants, I thought there was sort of a recklessness to that, and a a fiat to that associated with sort of Trumpian instincts that tells us a lot about where Donald Trump's head is.
Well, I have still am chagrined by the fact that okay, look, anybody that breaks a window of the United States Capitol and enters unlawfully has committed a crime. There is no if, ands, or buts about it. Not to mention the physical violence that you described, Mark. I mean, I am still chagrined to this day. I mean, one of the most horrific things I've watched in my time in politics. Take aside assassinations and all the other absolutely abhorrent things, but just on, in terms of quote demonstrations and political involvement, breaking into the U.S. Capitol, smashing windows, rampaging through the halls of Congress. I mean, that was just absolutely unconscionable. There was no excuse for it. There can be no excuse for it. And there can be no excuse for people not being held accountable for their actions. So, you know me, Mark, again, I'm going to say it one more time. I'm equally adept at and desirous of holding people accountable. I do not care what their political affiliation is, their ideology is, that those January 6 folks who committed crimes should be held accountable. Period.
Well, my point was in those pardons, you got all you needed to know about the impulse of Donald Trump, the new president, and the new administration. In other words, there's no political ideology here. You know that with Donald Trump, there's no political ideology. I'm saying that, not you, but I think it's clear. But there is an ideology. The ideology is either you're with me or you're my enemy. And those people on January 6th were with me, and that's why I pardoned them. But I want to move on to California. California has taken its own steps to try to push back against a lot of the administration ICE policy and the mask policy that is pursued by ICE agents. That is to say, they wear their masks in these various situations. They show up at these car washes. They're all masked up. They show up in any number of these in the agricultural fields and in restaurants, et cetera. They're all masked up. So Newsom in California is trying to say, no, not in California. There will be no federal officers in ICE or in any other capacity wearing masks and performing these arrests. Can you give us a sense of whether whether I've summarized it more or less correctly, and also B, whether you feel that actually stands a chance of being policy in California?
Yeah. Well, let me take the second one first because it's somewhat easier to address, and that is simply that it's going to be difficult for two reasons. One, because in terms of state and local officials, sometimes they use masking, and the legislation attempts to address this by saying, well, then you're going to have a badge on the outside with your department and your name so that we can identify you. And there's a whole host of reasons why law enforcement might mask up to go into some of these scenarios. Sometimes it's their own safety. If they're taking on gang elements, et cetera. I mean, as you know, Mark, there's some real doxing, there's some real targeting of law enforcement that's happened, especially by certain gang elements in California. They'll just take out an officer, right, at his home. I mean, if there's somebody who's been effective in infiltrating gang members, that's why you have people go undercover. So that's a challenge on the local and state level for law enforcement. They're going to have to figure out the mechanics of that. The federal part is much trickier and has, I think, some real legal challenges. There's no doubt ahead of it. That's what all the experts in the law are saying. That for the state to determine policy for federal law enforcement is undoubtedly going to be challenged, okay, for the obvious constitutional reasons. Now, as far as utilizing those masks by ICE agents, here again, the federal government, the Trump administration has said, again, we're saying that's for safety concerns for the ICE officers. I suspect, Mark, that very premise is going to be the essence of the challenge of this in court. Okay, it's going to be challenged, and a court's going to have to decide. Look, it's either valid that there's so much danger potentially to these federal law enforcement folks and federal ICE agents that masking is warranted, or it is not.
So that's the situation with the Justice Department, and I'm glad we visited a little bit of that. Over the weekend, the Charlie Kirk memorial service, it was an incredible thing to see it so very well attended. I mean, this is obviously someone who was so significant. Turning Point USA, I was saying, continues to be not only super relevant, probably animated in large measure by his tragic, violent death. I wonder if you can give me a thought on this and also sort of moving forward where we are at this point in America. I think we're kind of in a scary place.
Yeah, well, you know what's being cited to. First of all, the numbers, Mark, it's pretty remarkable. To your point, 80,000 people accommodated inside the arena in Phoenix, and 200,000 showed up, such that they were anticipating this. Had to have large outdoor screens, etc. That's pretty remarkable. To get 200,000 Americans, and some of these people they were interviewing, Mark, they came from all over the country to come to this. They felt like it was important to them personally, or otherwise to do so. Now, I think the most poignant part of the entire ceremony, people are pointing to this, and I hope, Mark, I truly hope that this maybe charts the beginnings of a way forward. Was Erica Kirk's, you know, this is touching to even say, saying, I forgive you to the shooter from the podium. And people on the right and left are saying, wow, that takes a lot, right? Just a little over a week after your spouses and, the father of your children is assassinated, to say, I forgive you from that podium to a national and international audience may well be, Mark, and most people are citing the most significant thing that happened at that entire event, because nobody would have the presence, the authority, the gravitas to utter those words and have them be taken seriously more than Erica Kirk, his spouse.
I hope that does chart a way forward. I mean, you're right. That was a watershed moment. It had I thought the event, from what I saw and what I read, it had a wonderful, of course, a religiosity to it that was very Charlie Kirk, and it also had a campaign rally quality to it from Trump, and Trump, of course, is a problematic figure because he can't keep his foot off the gas, I guess, and he has to express on the opposite side of that a hate for his opponents, and that was the yin and the yang of that. You can point to her, and I can point to him and go, yeah, but it seems as though this guy is still an influencer, a tastemaker, the president of the United States.
Yeah, what I would say, Mark, is this is interesting, okay? I totally agree with you, and I think there's many, many of us who kind of sit where I do in my kind of position and say, many of the Trump remarks, including things like tariffs and all kinds of things, he was trying to weave together the faith part of it and Charlie's support of a lot of those political perspectives and policy prescriptions. But I didn't think that was the place for it. Okay, I felt like, you talk about the policy stuff, even related to Charlie, in a separate setting, not a memorial service. That's my personal take, and I think that's widely shared by many people who sit in the kind of chairs that I do. My hope is that, Erica Kirk is young, and this Turning Point movement is young. And frankly, it's interesting, but as you well know, the largest cadre of that movement were young people. And the requests that have come in from college and high school campuses across the country to start Turning Point chapters. Where am I going with this, Mark? My point is simply this. In 3.5 years, Donald Trump, and I know now this will start a whole nother, no, he wants to be emperor for life. Okay, by our Constitution right now, he's supposed to be out of office. Turning Point, conversely, may well be, and we'll see where this ends up, Mark, after 26, 28, 2030. Could this be the start of a political movement that goes for quite a long time and animates people and activates people, especially young people, in ways that could way outlive the Trump impact? That is, I think, going to be the big question mark, because what happened yesterday in Phoenix did not look like a temporary phenomenon.
I completely agree with you. I made those comments at the start of the show. I think the future of America very much will be informed by Turning Point USA and sort of the adjacent movements, a wave of conservatism, and a wave of religious conservatism. It's a fascinating phenomenon to see it pick up a lot of steam. It's just so sad that this guy loses his life in this violent way, and that's I think one of the reasons that it's becoming supercharged. But But the fact that it is going to be supercharged, I think, is indeed just that a fact. So we agree, Gary Dietrich, on that. And look, I love our back and forth, and you've forgotten more about this stuff than I'll ever know, but I really do appreciate you indulging me. And so, again, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you being here.
Of course, Mark. And I just want to say, listen, brother, I appreciate your passion and that of every one of your listeners and viewers. This is a time where passions, understandably, are running high and deep. And I do not begrudge that to anybody. Frankly, Mark, I'd much rather have people engaged and passionate in the process than either checking out completely and going off the grid or being ultimately cynical and saying the future is absolutely doomed. So
Hey,
congrats to you.
let me just follow up on something you just said. You said are understandably impassioned and emotional or whatever. And you say understandably because
we are in a day that we probably haven't certainly seen. Most people are equating it to things like the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War. We're just engaged as a people, Mark, and as a society in the big issues of our time like we haven't been in a long, long time. And, some people they cite things like Vietnam War, civil rights movement, and then they go way back to maybe even as far as the Civil War in terms of times when our nation has been this engaged in the future of our country and in very deep feelings about it.
I'd say also that they're engaged because there are decisions being made and America is changing at such a massive rate that it almost demands your attention.
Yeah, Mark, I'm going to broaden that because, as you know, we don't get to talk enough about international. I think this is happening globally, and there's a lot of people saying that we have so much information now in the U.S. even about global events, and we're so tied in globally in a way we never have been. That some of these same dialogues, questions, upheavals, as you well know, are happening around the globe as well.
It's funny that you say this because I had on my list of things I want to talk to you about today, the UN. I have some strong thoughts about the future of the UN and what's happened now. The UN's in crisis, even as they're celebrating their 80th anniversary. It's a time of crisis, it would seem, always in the world, but particularly now, as you point out. And yet this institution that was designed to somehow kind of stop the bleeding internationally, I think it's bleeding out a bit on its own. So can we table it for next week? I'd love to talk to you.
Save that for next week.
All right, good stuff. Thanks, Gary. Gary Dietrich, everybody. Love you coming through, my friend. Thank you so much. And Gary is brought to you by Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. He's a great realtor. I mean, a guy with credibility, with knowledge, with respect. If you are relocating into or from Northern California and you want a truly respected real estate professional, contact Bill Campbell, Remax Gold. You can text him or you can call him 530-448-7474, 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell, Remax Gold. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.